I want to start with a confession that might make you uncomfortable. Very early on in my diplomatic career, I was a diary secretary to a top Foreign Office official. As the most junior civil servant in the room, I very much knew my place, which was, as you might expect, right at the bottom of the diplomatic food chain. But then I started noticing something strange. Suddenly, senior officials knew my name. They'd stop to chat, ask me about my weekend, and seem genuinely interested in me and my life. At first, I was baffled. Surely they had better things to be doing with their time, deciding and advising on very significant geopolitical foreign policy. And then it dawned on me. I controlled access to the boss, the big boss. If you wanted 5 minutes with him, you had to come through me. And I say this with zero shame. Those who were courteous got bumped to the top of the line. Those who weren't didn't. And that taught me something that challenges everything we're usually told about leadership. Influence doesn't follow the organisation chart. It flows through invisible networks. But here's what made this really interesting. I started paying attention to who else these senior officials courted. The security guard who decided which visitors got waved through versus subjected to lengthy checks. The IT support person who could prioritise urgent tech fixes. The canteen manager who knew everyone's coffee preferences and somehow always had the best gossip. These weren't random acts of kindness. They were strategic investments in an invisible network that actually ran the building. Here's the reality that most leaders miss. Every organisation has two power structures running simultaneously. First, there's the official hierarchy. That's the one we see printed on organisation charts, displayed in corridors, written into job descriptions. Second, there's the influence network, an invisible web of relationships, trust and access that actually determines how things get done. Most leaders obsess over climbing that visible hierarchy. The truly effective ones also learn to navigate the invisible ones. I've watched this play out countless times before. The newly appointed director with the impressive title who can't get basic decisions made, while the coordinator 3 levels down moves mountains with just a phone call. The consultant brought in at enormous expense whose recommendations gather dust while the admin assistant's suggestions somehow become policy. The difference is that one has formal authority on paper, the other has built real influence through relationships. We assume influence flows from sharp arguments and commanding presence, that power sits neatly in titles and corner offices. But here's what actually happens. Arguments rarely change minds. Titles don't guarantee followership. The quiet assistant controlling the boss's diary often has more leverage than the boss themselves. Your formal training doesn't prepare you for this reality. Business schools teach you to analyse financial statements and build strategic frameworks. MBA programs focus on decision trees and market analysis. Leadership courses emphasise vision, authenticity and communication. But nobody actually teaches you that the person who books the CEO's calendar might be the most powerful person in the building, or that the facilities manager who controls office assignments can make or break team dynamics by assigning who gets to sit next to whom, or that the financial administrator who processes expenses knows more about actual spending patterns than the chief financial officer, the CFO. During my postings in Pakistan and Egypt, I watched influence flow through channels that would never appear on any org chart. The real influencers weren't always obvious. The driver who heard everything first, the interpreter who decided which nuance made it into the conversation, the personal assistant who'd been there 20 years and knew where the bodies were buried, or the team leader everyone confided in. They didn't always have the biggest offices or the most significant job titles, but they sat at the intersection of information, access and trust. Let me give you a concrete example. In one embassy, I won't say which, there was a protocol officer, officially quite junior, who had been there for 15 years. She knew every local dignitary, their family connections, their political sensitivities, even their dietary requirements. When the ambassador needed to navigate a delicate cultural situation, guess who he turned to? Not the political counsellor, who he should, in hierarchical terms, but the protocol officer who actually understood the landscape. I've seen executives cut through months of bureaucracy with a 5-minute conversation with the right person, and I've watched brilliant strategies die because leaders ignored that influence network entirely. Here's what happens when you miss the network. You spend weeks crafting the perfect proposal, only to discover the decision was made in a hallway conversation you weren't part of. You present to the board thinking you're influencing the CEO when the real decision maker is their chief of staff who wasn't even in the room. You try to drive change through formal channels, while the informal network quietly undermines your efforts. The invisible influencers have something that can't be printed on business cards. They have access, information, and most importantly, they have trust. People confide in them, people seek their advice and value their opinions. And here's the crucial insight. They're often invisible precisely because they're effective. They don't need titles or corner offices because they have something more powerful. They have relationships that actually move decisions. Over 2+ decades, I've identified 5 key types of invisible influencers that exist in every organisation, whether that's in government or whether in the private sector or any industry. Number 1, the information brokers. These are the people who sit at information crossroads. The executive assistant who sees all the emails. The project manager who attends every cross-functional meeting. The HR business partner who knows what's really happening in each department. They don't just have access to information, they understand its significance and know who needs to hear what. They're the human equivalent of LinkedIn's people you should know algo, but with context and judgment. Number 2, the access controllers. Beyond the obvious gatekeepers like assistants, these include anyone who controls scarce resources, meeting rooms, budget approvals, expense requests, technology access, even parking spaces. In one company I worked with, the office manager who assigned desks quietly shaped collaboration partners by deciding who sat near whom. Number 3, the trust anchors. These are the people others naturally confide in. They might be long-tenured employees, natural counsellors, or simply those who've proven their discretion over time. They become unofficial advisors and their opinions carry enormous weight precisely because they're not seen as having an agenda. Number 4, the bridge builders. Every organisation has silos. Bridge builders are the rare individuals who maintain relationships across those boundaries. They translate between departments, smooth over conflicts and make connections that wouldn't otherwise happen. Often they're in roles that naturally cross functions: operations, project management, business development. Number 5, the legacy holders. These are the people who embody institutional memory. They understand not just current processes, but why things are the way they are. They know what's been tried before, what failed, and what really motivates the organisation. Their influence comes from context and wisdom. And here's what's really fascinating. Most of these people don't actively seek influence. They accumulate it naturally through competence, reliability, and genuine relationships. That's exactly why they're so powerful. People trust them because they don't appear to want anything for themselves. Here's what actually happens when you're trying to create change. Map the real power. Forget the org chart. Ask yourself, who does the CEO actually listen to? Who controls access and the flow of information? Who is closest to the leader or the decision maker, both physically and in terms of trust? Who can kill your project with a whisper? Who commands respect among the people you need to move? Let me give you the advanced version of this mapping exercise. This is the 3-circle analysis. The inner circle. Who has direct access and influence with key decision makers? The information circle. Who knows what's really happening before it becomes official? And then the execution circle. Who actually makes things happen on the ground? The sweet spot is finding people who sit in multiple circles. The CFO's analyst who has access, inner circle, sees all the financial data first, information circle, and controls budget processes, execution circle. That person might be more valuable to know than the CFO themselves. Remember, influence often hides in supporting roles. I learned this lesson watching a brilliant policy director struggle for months to get sign-off on a critical initiative. Meanwhile, the head of ops, 3 levels below on the org chart, could get the same decision made with a casual conversation over coffee. Why? Because she had the CEO's trust, built over years of quietly solving problems before they became crises. The ops head understood something that the policy director missed. Proximity often beats seniority every single time. Here's the practical mapping process I use with my clients. Week 1. Observe. Who do senior leaders actually spend time with? Who do they seek out for informal conversations? Who gets pulled into last-minute meetings? Week 2. Listen. In meetings, whose opinion shifts the room? Whose questions change the agenda? Who does the boss look to when they need confirmation? Week 3, test. Try routing a small request through both formal and informal channels. Which gets faster, better results? And week 4, document. Actually create your influence map. Not what the org chart says, but what you've observed really happens. At this point, you might be feeling a bit of resistance and discomfort. This kind of feels a bit Machiavellian, right? But here's the key. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding reality so you can be more effective. When you understand who really influences decisions, you can craft better solutions, build stronger coalitions, and create change that actually sticks. When you don't map real power, you'll chase titles that mean nothing. When you don't build authentic networks, you rely on force and ultimately lose respect. When you don't understand the invisible influencers, others will define your influence for you. Most leaders are progressing towards influence goals that were given to them, climbing hierarchies designed by someone else rather than building the networks that actually move decisions. So, here's my question. If you redrew your power map today, who would surprise you by sitting at the centre? Start there. Build proximity with them, understand what they care about, help solve their problems. But here's the kicker, and this is what we'll dive into next time. The skills that make you effective at building those invisible networks are the exact opposite of the skills that will get you promoted. Your greatest achievements might be the ones you can never talk about, and that creates an impossible choice that every leader faces. We'll explore that paradox and how to solve it in our next episode. Until then, map your real power structure. You might be surprised by what you discover. If you found this briefing useful, like, follow, subscribe. Also, I write in more detail on power, influence, and transferable diplomatic skills in my weekly newsletters. Links in the show notes. Thanks for listening.